Hi, I'm Hannah McKnight. Welcome to our newest episode of Wishlist. Occasionally on Wishlist, we are going to be featuring non-binary people who have already made their dreams come true. They had a wish, and through hard work and a little bit of luck and talent, they were able to make it happen for themselves. Really excited to introduce you all to Venus to Mars, one of the most prolific non-binary artists who is still recording today. We are very excited to be in the recording studio of Venus to Mars, one of the most prominent transgender people in the Twin Cities over the last several decades. Venus, thank you so much for being on Wishlist.
Absolutely.
So you have been involved in the music scene for a little bit over 30 years now?
Yeah.
What do you attribute your longevity to? I mean, that's an amazing
determination, stubbornness. I don't know. It got to be a point when I had no idea what else I would do. I have been in the music industry quite a bit longer than just 30 years. My first album I put out in 1984, and that's Animal Angst. Kind of a DIY synth thing. And that was after the band I had before broke up. And that band I formed in Duluth I think 1980. I formed that band with my bandmates at that time. And that was during the Replacements were a brand new band warming up for the Suburbs. The Suburbs were the big band. The Flaming O's, also Robert's band, was a big deal back then too. Still is, of course, but I mean that was when we were all so much younger. And the Suburbs were the big signed band, so they were the rock stars. The management companies that worked kind of with everybody found out about us in Duluth, and one individual, an offshoot, Mike Burke, who was working for some of those industries, had his own sub-label or sub-management company, and he invited us to come down to Minneapolis, relocate, and then he would represent us. And of course, we jumped at that. That's how I got to Minneapolis. But his business model fell apart pretty soon after we hit town. So we lost that. And we had a big band house out in St. Paul. And a couple months in after our relocation, different bandmates were struggling with life. My synthesizer player was having a child, and they decided that they just couldn't be in the band, and the band just kind of fell apart after that. So I was on my own, and but I was determined to stay in music. So I recorded Animal Angst on the 4-track back there. One of the 4, well, maybe it wasn't that particular 4-track, but it was a 4-track like that. That I had obtained used. Actually, my spouse, Lynette, bought it for me for Christmas from the production company she was working for at the time, and they were going to throw it away, so she bought it really cheap. Anyway, I recorded that, put out the album, Animal Angst. The album tanked. It was right when Prince's 1999 album came out, and that got all the attention, for a good reason. And mine just got dismissed. It actually made it out to Germany. I have no clue how it made it out to Germany, but it got on the DJ list out there because they were big on DIY synth, and they liked one song called Burn My Eyes, and it got to be popular out there. And so I have this little fan base in Germany for that album. And it's a collectible now. but then everything fell apart. I went into art, and performance art, filmmaking, painting. I still painted throughout the whole thing. And then eventually found my way back to music in the very end of 1993 with my drummer, who was the drummer for my band previous, Bill Bailey, approached me wanting to reform that band. That didn't happen. But we found a coworker that we both knew from a t-shirt screen print company that we worked at, and Ed Ford, and he agreed to be our bass player, and that became All the Pretty Horses. So by 1994, we were creating our first songs and our set and beginning to figure out if we should perform. We put out a debut album and then started performing. And I just released that debut album actually on Bandcamp recently, but that came out real early. So yeah, that's how long I've been working. And I don't know, that is, you know, this, I told you, I warned you I'm a chatterbox. I have ADHD. It just, I go. Yeah, longevity. Why? You know, I came out in 1988, so shortly after my first band disbanded, I came out and I started being my trans self. And at that time, we used the term androgyny, not gender fluid. And I chose to do that because I was in this underground crossing support group. And that's how I kind of got on my feet and found some community. But it was very closeted, and it was a frightening time back then, you know, very dangerous to be out in public. But I was determined to do something, and that was not satisfying my dysphoria to do it just on this clandestine monthly thing. So a friend of mine was already doing androgyny, and I decided I would do that. So I began living full-time as that, with that persona. Gender fluid is what we would say now. And I brought that into the band in 1993. And so All the Pretty Horses, I have always been as an out trans performer. And I think I stayed with it because the stage gave me a place. It gave me a safe place to be myself, be my authentic, true self. I could be powerful on stage. I could change people's minds. Because a lot of our audience had no clue what being trans was, what it was, but I was able to talk with them. I could change. I was making the world more comfortable for myself. And in doing that, I made it more comfortable for other people. And as I performed and we built, I realized that a lot of people in the audience were trans people, not necessarily out, but they would talk to me and thank me for having a safe space. And that gave me motivation to continue to work. And I wanted to change the world. I wanted to change the world because it was a shitty world back then for trans people. And, on one level, that was a selfish motivation because it benefited me if I could do that. But it in turn, I recognized how it was benefiting a whole community. And I felt energized and rewarded emotionally, feeling like I could do something and I could make a difference and I could be integral in a possible future that I never imagined would actually unfold, and it did.
With like the late 70s and 80s, musicians like whether it's David Bowie or Patti Smith or Prince, who I had mentioned, really kind of communicating and presenting as maybe like gender fluid or as androgynous. Were any of those artists inspiration to you, thinking like, you know what, if they can do it, if the stage is a safe place for them, maybe it's a safe place for me?
The inspiration was Bowie. Because of his gender experimentation in the Ziggy Stardust era, and I saw that as a kid. And that spoke to me. I didn't really have the language back then, but it spoke to me as something that touched me. And then I just followed his career, and I was fascinated with how he moved through the world. And so he became somebody that I really paid attention to. But I didn't really have trans role models. Nobody was out back then. They're really, because Bowie wasn't really trans. He was just playing, and in a good way, but he was playing. I later discovered, later in my career, I met Jane County out in New York when we were touring out there through a mutual friend, another trans woman who is a rock and roll performer, Lisa Friday, who is now doing more musical theater, one-woman shows in New York and doing really well. But at that time, she had a band and she was doing rock and roll. And I met her when we started going out there, and she knew Jane. And so introduced me to Jane, and I got to know her. And she was a generation before me out the Max's Kansas City era, New York, which finished right before we went out there. So that I just heard about it. I wasn't out there right at that time. But she was part of that. And she knew Bowie, and she was part of that whole scene. But I didn't know who she was. I mean, this is before internet. You just didn't know anything. It was really hard to find out what was going on outside your city. Maybe your state, you could kind of find some things out, but beyond that, it was pretty tough to find out. There were a lot of zines. There was a lot of underground stuff, physical newspapers, newsletters, underground things, but nothing like the social media that we have now.
You mentioned, David Bowie not being, truly trans, and, I think, he would have agreed with you if he was still with us.
But he definitely, he continued doing stuff. Right. So I am going to hold that thought and say that I'm not sure.
Fair enough.
I'm not sure, because he would play with that in his music videos later on in his career. And I bet he had an aspect of his life that he just chose not to be out in public and make that a big deal. But I bet he had an aspect of gender fluidity that he was relaxed about and enjoyed. So I'm just gonna make that observation. I always imagined I'd meet him someday because one of my producers, when my current producer was in a business team called Super Buddha, they both met Bowie, and so it was like, all right, it's going to happen, but it didn't.
Well, the term I remember hearing a lot in the 80s was gender bending. And when you were presenting and performing, as Venus on stage, was it ever frustrating because maybe some people in the audience felt that you were just kind of following the traditions of gender bending, like most artists, where it was more of a real identity aspect to you? Did you ever feel like your gender was being trivialized? Or?
Yeah. Oh, always. The press really had no use for us. The industry had no use for us. Everything, and there were individuals that were supportive, of course. But as a whole, we were kind of seen as a flash in the pan novelty. Mm-hmm. We were seen as a novelty. And that is one of the reasons, actually, as you talk about it, that's one of the reasons, because I started on hormones very early. I started, I think, 1994 on HRT, and I shouldn't have gotten it. I should not have. I was not approved for it. I didn't go through any protocol. I didn't do anything. I self-advocated the whole time. I was a squeaky wheel, determined. And I just happened to find a kind doctor through the insurance clinics that I was with, who believed me and helped me connect up with an endocrinologist, and we set up HRT. And it was not, we were under the radar. It finally caught up with me in early 2000s, where the insurance found out and pulled it from me. But I, again, contested it and went through an appeals process. They smelled a lawsuit and they reinstated it. So I got it back, but it was startling. But I've been on it a long time. So that's a long story around to say I had breasts. And I chose to demonstrate that I was not just being stage, doing something for a stage only. I wanted to show and demonstrate that I was 24/7 who I was. And that's why I chose to do the fetish, topless, pasties, that whole presentation, to prove that this was not something I was just putting on for a stage.
Speaking of being on stage, what kind of vibe or energy do you think the audience was projecting, or how do you feel that your audience was reacting to you once they realized that you were indeed trans? Was it ever a hostile type of environment? Did you ever feel scared upstage, or?
I was so caught up in the music on stage that I never felt in danger on stage, but I would get threats off stage or after the show. Sometimes I would try to get bandmates who were cis to walk with me out to the car to get the van or the car, whatever we were driving in, to unload. I got that. But I felt so empowered from being on stage that it didn't stop me. And it was not a constant. Usually people were just extremely curious and interested in the party aspect, the freedom, that whole thing, and were feeling energized by that kind of atmosphere that the band created. And as I talked with people, they totally understood and accepted me for being trans. Not always in the kindest way, or the appropriate way, I should say, because the male pronoun was used constantly about me, and and to be fair, it was a time when we really didn't have that as a thing in the community, and I did not push to be referred to as female. I kind of left it up to everyone to make their own decision, because I was thinking of being gender fluid, in between genders at that time is how I was describing myself, and so I didn't want to label myself as one or the other. So I kind of let it organically grow, but yeah. For the most part, the audience is there for us. We had a good audience. Even when we toured and we went out to New York, there was an audience there that we built up. And we had a lot of support. The industry didn't know what to do with us. So the record labels in town, we got on Twin Tone through the help of a friend of mine who was one of the A&R people there. And he was able to get us on. That was for our Queens and Angels album. That was our second album. But it didn't quite fit Twin Tone's idea of the punk label. And the two owners of Twin Tone were not in agreement about having us on that label. So we never really got anywhere. We just were there. We got an album out through that they paid for, but then we lost access to it, and we never benefited really from being on a label, except to say that we were on Twin Tone. And by then, Twin Tone had subdivided into TRG, Twin Tone Record Group, and we were on the main label, which was Twin Tone. But there was a number of smaller labels that they were kind of overseeing. The industry didn't really know what to do with us. And then it was really hard to book because the clubs weren't really sure about us. Me being topless with pasties was pretty controversial. The press didn't know what to do with us because what do you do with a photograph? You can't print photographs. My spouse would always argue with me. It's like, well, you're shooting yourself in your foot. You're not going to get publicity if you're going to look like this on stage. Well, we built the audience, and I felt empowered being able to be my authentic self without question on stage. But I can see her point, and we may have contributed to some of that difficulty in getting ahead. But we were still seen as a novelty, even when we got press, and we did get press. But it was always pitched in that novelty, sensational way. So what do you do with that? I'm not sure. I just got mad. I got mad. And it was like, I'm going to show you all. And that was part of my motivation to keep going, too. I just was like, I'm going to make it work. I don't care what you say. So
obviously you did, because you're still here and you're still recording.
Yeah, and in an interesting way, perhaps because we never got signed, and we didn't get that whole investment thing happening. I retain rights to all my music. I have my own publishing company. It's my business. I own everything. I call the shots. I would not have that freedom if I had gotten caught up with some big company investing and wanting to squeeze every last bit of possibility out of us. I may not have been able to retain my voice. I may not have been able to retain anything. Look at how, even with the advantages that Prince had with being on Warner Brothers, he eventually got frustrated at that and felt trapped by it. And he luckily was able to leverage in a way to break himself free of it. But it is that business is really not very conducive to longevity unless you are very lucky. So in a way, I kind of dodged a bullet, I think. I didn't think that at the time, but I do now.
So obviously the industry has changed a lot.
Oh, incredibly.
What, and as we're recording this, it's December of 2024. And I think like the trans community is always looking for like positivity and optimism. Is there anything, but in some ways, like, when you first mentioned that back in '94 when you started, HRT, there's been a lot of things that have happened over the last 20 years, and things have gotten better for our community. Maybe not for very long, but we're seeing some progress. What do you think is like, if at your most positive, optimistic self, what do you think is like changed the most for a trans artist over the last 20 years?
We have a very strong ally contingent, which we didn't have back then. So we only had each other back then. And it was hard to get all of us together because we were very fractured. It was mostly just individuals that bumped into each other. Not terribly organized. We are in the social dialogue. For now, the backlash is definitely taking advantage of that dialogue and using it against us, but we are present. We're at the table. We were not at the table back then. And I think we will get through whatever. I mean, it is difficult. We might have to go underground in some ways again. But we're always going to be here. And we'll figure it out. And maybe it's, I was talking to another trans friend of mine. I had lunch with her yesterday. And she's from my era. Was out way before any of us had any rights. And she was reminding me, we lived that. We know how to do it. We can do it. And maybe it's for those of us that did live those old days to remind people that we're gonna figure it out. Even if we have to go back down to doing zines and mailing things to each other and doing that, we're gonna figure it out somehow. So the positive things, I think, is that we are at the table. We are part of society now, and we weren't before.
So even if we're suppressed, people will still remember that we exist.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
They can only ignore us for so long.
Yeah. Yeah. We have some foundation.
I like that. Thank you. What do you think is next for you as an artist?
Well, what am I going to do next? Well, I'm going to continue doing music. I have a number of songs that I've half started. I got my latest song out and music video, Even with Scars. That was a few months ago. And I feel really proud of that. And it was, but lately with all the atmosphere and stuff, it's kind of stalled. I've been struggling with my lyrics. I was just talking to my bandmates that my lyrics, it seems like I can't write anything important enough. The bar is set really high. And to write just a party song or a swagger song like I used to do, it seems pointless. I haven't figured that one out yet. I got to figure it out. I have one song I did get lyrics for that I'm at least to that level, and I'm playing with it. All the other songs I've got my vocal melodies worked out, and the syllables and the consonants worked out, kind of. That's kind of how I start writing. I make up words, and And then when I start trying to get lyrics, I try to fit them to those consonants. And then it starts to build a thread of thought, and then I can build lyric off of that. So I'm hopeful that I will get an album out this year. But I need to push myself. And again, I have ADHD, so sometimes it is a gift of tunnel vision and concentration, and sometimes I am just so scattered I don't get anything done. So it's reining that thing, that superpower in, and directing it to the right direction. So hopefully a new album is coming. We have our 20-year anniversary of Venus of Mars, the documentary that came out in 2004 about myself and my spouse and the band at that time. And that we had the first screening just before the election, and I was warning people that we have some work to do coming up. And the filmmaker, even though she's not a filmmaker, she's not really working, she's more retired now with that. She's got other interests that she is putting a lot of her time in. She is taking it seriously and considering doing a follow-up film, documentary of Venus and Mars. And so we've been sharing some ideas. She's just not sure what the structure is going to be or how that film will look, but we're in the early days of that, and that may very well come to pass. So that is possibly in the future. I have a documentary that I never released called Standstill that I did in early 90s. I started filming in 92. I think I did the grant edit in 96 from that material that I recorded from that early days with the trans community. As many people as I could find, and I knew at that time, kind of a spectrum of people, and 2 psychiatrists who worked in the field back then. I think there's about 12 people that I involved in that interview process. I have all that footage, and I'm really, really wanting to revisit that and formally release that as a historical documentation. And possibly, if I can find some of those subjects, if they're still willing now, 30 years later, willing to be interviewed, I may be able to include that too. So that is something that's on one of my burners to get done. So yeah, and remain visible. That is the main thing, is to remain visible as a trans woman, no matter what.
Well, it must be strange to have this goal of remaining visible and being still very active. You talk about, a documentary, a follow-up documentary, a new record. But you also mentioned this retrospective documentary.
Yeah.
Is it strange to see, in a way, your life, kind of put into like a documentary where you have like this finite period of time where you're like, yes, that was then, but there's still so much more that I'm doing now and so much more I'm, doing. I mean, like, had you not done anything after that documentary, you still would have been, considered a legacy and a legend in the music scene and the queer scene. But now you're still moving on. Is there part of you where you're like, can we wait and do the legacy stuff after I retire? Or is it just kind of cool to see like that period of time immortalized?
I think it's so important right now to acknowledge what we've done and the progress we've made. It's only been about 10 years since insurance covered surgical transition. That is when I first came out in 1988. I came out as the term transsexual at that time. And I stayed with that internally. I knew that's who I was, but there was just no option. I didn't have the money. I didn't know if our relationship would maintain it. There was just no way to do it. There was just a couple places in the United States that did it, and everything else was overseas. I mean, that's how recent our opportunities to be ourselves are. I did finally, once insurance was opened that door, I did have my transition. I am post-surgical now, and I could not be happier. This is where I should have been my whole life, but I didn't have that option. I think instead of leaving things back, I like doing both, acknowledging the history, acknowledging where we've come, and then moving forward and demonstrating where we can go. I think it's important to acknowledge every rung of the ladder that we have climbed, and not forget that, because we build from our history. We create the future from our history, and we learn how to do it. And if we don't look back, we won't know how to look forward. So, yeah, no, it feels like I'm doing the right thing.
Are you afraid that, perhaps our generation is kind of forgetting how much progress that we made, and maybe getting a little less involved in, keep moving forward?
It's definitely a frightening time with a government who is actively wanting to eliminate our ability to be in public. That is pretty frightening. And for the community members who didn't know what it was like before, our freedoms, that can feel impossible. It feels oppressive to me, and I can sometimes feel overwhelmed by that, but I am relying on community, my contacts, and my experience to weather whatever happens. I don't know if we're getting complacent. No, I don't think we're getting complacent. I don't think we are turning away. But I do want to make sure that we are bridge building and not bridge burning. If we get so angry that we burn bridges, we will inhibit our ability to move forward. We need to convince the people who are against us to see us as human. We need to build that connection, not shut them out, not dismiss them or ignore them. We have to engage in them. And we have to engage with them in such a way as they will listen. If we just rant, they won't listen. We need to engage in a way that there is dialogue and there is communication. I learned this by touring across the country back in the day when people just could not understand what the I was doing. You can bleep that one out. And I would get confronted by people in the audience, the regulars in the clubs. I mean, we would have our audience that knew we were coming and would come up, the friendlies would come out and support us. But there were the regulars that were just like, what the hell is going on? And I would engage with them before the show at the bar. But I learned that if I was able to talk with them and not just shut them out, find the common ground. One of the things I would say on stage after we win most of them over because of the sound, the music, you know. They liked the music. They weren't sure what we were doing on stage visually, but they liked the music and they were curious. You know, we got them that way. One of the things I would say is that I would pause and I would just talk to the audience, and I would say, everyone in the audience, everyone, no matter who you are, you could be a CEO, you could be a taxi driver, you could be a construction worker. Everybody out there knows what it's like to be an outsider. We all have had the experience where we were not picked for whatever schoolyard game that we were going to do, or we got bullied, or we were the bullies, but we were so lonely. We all know what it's like to be alone and to be an outsider. And on that level, we all can agree. We all know what this feels like. And often, just that statement, I would get people after the show coming up and telling me that that I changed things for them, changed how they thought about things. I was probably the first trans person they ever saw. But they had a different idea now because of that. That's the kind of engagement we need to do with these people that have not met us. They don't know us. They're just hearing rhetoric. They need to know us. That's why it's so important to be visual, to be out there, to be present. When we are their family members, when we are their co-workers, when we are their loved ones, when we are their sons and daughters, or their aunts and uncles, or their moms and dads, then we're going to make a difference. That is what we need to do.
That is beautiful. That's very optimistic, and I think you're onto something. You know, it's just changing, you know, minds. You know, one conversation at a time. You know, being able to relate to people, and you know, having that commonality, and hopefully that's going to shift things.
I've seen it happen. I've seen it shift, and it is sometimes one at a time. But I have seen the difference that can make. I know it works.
I think that's a wonderful place for us to wrap up the conversation. Venus, it's just been an honor to be in the same room as you. I remember when I was in my early 20s and I knew that you and your band were playing at a place not too far from my house, and obviously I heard a lot about you, and I think you were the first trans person that I ever knew or had heard of, and I got dolled up and drove and sat outside and just didn't have the courage to go in, but it always had a very special place in my heart. So, you know, if I could go back in time and talk to 22-year-old me before I was Hannah, I don't think they would have believed that I'm here with you. So thank you for all you do.
I was honored to be invited to do this. Thank you. Anything I can do. It's the world. I am so proud of our trans community. I am so proud of what we have been able to do. It blows me away. And we have been able to do it collectively. It is all of us together. It is not just those of us that were out there in the early days. It is all of us together. And that's how we make a difference. And I am so sorry you
well, I've got to see you since then, so.
But I would have, that would have been just, I would have just been thrilled. So.
You inspired me to leave, so that's always the first step for a lot of us. So yeah. Thank you for continuing to be my inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us for this very special episode of Wishlist, and we'll see you soon.